What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. Great news. The worst week of the sports calendar is finally over. Somehow, right in the middle of the NBA and the NHL playoffs, we had a whole week with no basketball and no hockey. I don't understand how those leagues let that happen, but thank goodness we are on the other side. This podcast is dropping Thursday, June 6th, which is going to be the same day as game one of the NBA Finals. We're recording it on Wednesday night, June 5th. And to help me break down the NBA Finals matchup between the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks, Matt is going to be joining the podcast in just a moment. And we also invited longtime friend of the program, Clint, back. I think second straight year where he's going to be breaking down the NBA Finals with us. And it was a lot of fun last year. So we're excited to have him here. We're going to bring Matt and Clint in, but before we get started, just want to remind you that you could reach out to us, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. We really appreciate you guys listening. We would love to hear from you. Send us your finals picks. We're all going to make picks for who's going to win the finals and how many games on this podcast after we break down the series a little bit. And we'd love to hear yours. So again, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. But for now, let's go get Matt. Let's go get Clint, and let's go. All right, Matt is here. And as promised, bringing back longtime friend of the program, Clint is here as well. I think Clint was on earlier this year for some of the NBA Hot Take podcast. Also here for the NBA Finals last year, which was a lot of fun. So we're happy to have him back. Clint, how you doing, buddy?
I'm all right. Hanging in there, living a dream. So I'm excited to be back on. There's been a lot of wild basketball stuff that's happened. So I've been like really excited. I've been itching to talk about it. Matt's heard a lot about my takes and stuff. So I'm hoping to have a fun discussion today.
That's good. We're looking forward to hearing your takes on the podcast as well. Clint was just catching us up on his life about buying a new house and all this other stuff, but that's a separate pod. We can talk about the joys of home ownership sometime. What we really want to hear is how you've been feeling about the NBA playoffs so far, because Matt and I have just been losing our minds on the podcast every week and haven't heard about how you've been feeling. I guess Matt's heard some, but I haven't gotten to get my Clint takes.
Yeah. There's been some like really clown shoe statements made. I think the most outrageous thing that I've heard and that I've kind of like absorbed about the NBA playoffs is if the ball bounces a couple of different ways here or there for us and we get a couple of rebounds and put some shots in, the Lakers would have advanced in in the opening rounds. And I was just like, what in the hell are you on about? So that's been interesting. I think at the beginning of the season, if you would have told me that the two teams that were in were going to be in the finals, I don't think I would have. I definitely would have taken the field over these two. I didn't think the Kyrie Luka experiment was going to yield any kind of benefit. And I didn't think I gotta own my failures. I don't know. I don't remember if I said it on the podcast, but I told Matt before the playoffs started that like the Miami Heat were gonna go from like the eighth seed and they were gonna cruise into the finals again. So I gotta eat some crow on that.
To be
But
fair to you, though, to be fair to you there, if they would have had Jimmy, we actually could have been talking about them making it further in the playoffs, right? Because
yeah.
that's a huge difference.
Oh, for sure. I think like Indiana's coming out party was pretty interesting to watch and to be able to like witness that, I suppose. And then out of the West, I thought like Denver was gonna run away with it. I think that like the T-Wolves like surprised me. I think the lack of experience that they have in the playoffs is kind of like the bane of that team's existence right now because like you could tell every one of those guys was gassed when they got to the conference finals, I believe it was, right? They played
Yeah.
Dallas. So yeah, I think that like they'll be a heck of a lot better prepared next season, but like the 16 extra games and the extra effort that you're going to put in the playoffs is, and that's 16 wins. That's not like 16 total games, but the 16 W's that you got to get your NBA championship. It's really interesting to watch because it's like you see people kind of coast through the season about 80%, and then there are guys that can just turn it on. And I think having not experienced other people just turning it on against you is like a big eye opener. And I think that like that was to their detriment, but I don't think that it precludes them from being able to get back to a like a successful spot. I think it's like a really good learning opportunity for them. I think that it's really interesting. Like there's a lot of good basketball that's been played, and I think like a lot of those games were entertaining to watch. So
Yeah, it's been a fun playoff so far. I don't think you're the only person on this three-man podcast who was surprised by the Nuggets not getting out of the second round. There's a lesson in the Nuggets thing, though, about parity in the league, because this is now the fifth straight year where the defending champion failed to make the conference finals the following year. It's because we don't have like that dominant multi-year run team right now, like the Heat with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, or like the Warriors with Curry and Durant and that kind of stuff. You know, there's a lot of teams with like a lot of good players spread out. My borderline psychotic take that I threw out on the podcast that I'm going to take my victory lap on now is that Luka was actually a much worse matchup for the Timberwolves than Jokic was. And when I said that, I got a lot of shit before the Western Conference Finals, but that Wolves team was created to beat Denver, and they did what they were made to do. They were not made to guard guys like Luka and Kyrie. Like, they
yeah,
just don't have the
I
beef on the wings to do it.
Mm-hmm.
that yeah, I was gonna say that too. I think well, and Jokic basketball is a game of like differing speeds, right? So as long as you have two different speeds you can go, you can have success at like whatever level you're playing at. And Jokic is like a slow, and then he switches into moderate, and he's got like the body size to be able to take like big steps and move a lot of space, but he doesn't have to do it very quickly. Where like Kyrie and Luka are fast and faster. So like you know, you're going up against somebody, you're getting bruised by Jokic wherever he's at on the court. You're taking a physical beating, and then um again, as opposed to being playing against someone who's like extremely fast, a lot of finesse. It's like the antithesis of that game. So they're just wearing you down in two different ways, and it's like pick your poison. You want to get beat up physically, or do you want to just get ran, you know, to the point where you're just exhausted?
Yeah, I would just hate to be a Wolves fan right now, and having had to have watched my team play Jokic for 7 games and then immediately go into a series against Luka. And it's just like, fuck, man. That's a tough draw because you got the two best players in the world back to back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but all of that has led us here to the NBA Finals, where we have the Boston Celtics versus the Dallas Mavericks. Clint, you said you had a super hot take to throw out right off the top. Is it NBA Finals related?
It's NBA Finals adjacent. I think if the Mavs pull off the W here and they walk out with the Larry O'Brien trophy, I believe in my heart of hearts, Kyrie Irving might actually like acknowledge that the world is a sphere. Like that's where we might get. And that would be like the greatest victory because he wouldn't let down like all these kids who are like looking up to him.
So we had a whole week off between the end of the conference finals and the NBA finals. And just, I think that was just too much time for a lot of media people. And they're like, oh shit, how do we fill these 7 days on first take where we got to throw out a lot of crazy stuff? The Kyrie Irving whitewashing that has gone on the last week is absolutely ludicrous, where people are all coming out, and because he had a good conference finals, they're like, you got to apologize to Kyrie. You said
No,
Kyrie was a problem, and now look at him and blah blah blah.
two
It's
things
great.
can exist at the same time. Like,
I think this was the thing that was so frustrating about Kyrie is that he is such a good basketball player and he is such a joy to watch when he's playing well, but
Mm-hmm.
he's also a crazy person. And like he's still a crazy person. That dropping 30 points against the Wolves does not make him not a crazy person. And also like people forget not even ancient history in the series against the Thunder, the one where the Mavs went to 6 games and could have potentially lost. He had 2 games where he scored 9 points and 1 game where he scored 12. So, nobody was coming out after his 9 point performance against the Thunder and being like, you got to apologize to Kyrie. He is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, even from a basketball perspective with Kyrie, he is incredible when what he does is clicking. When it doesn't click, he is a net negative by far on the court because a lot of what he does isn't necessarily like sound basketball decisions. But when it works, then it not only is he putting up like 30 points for you, but the defense has to do so much to account for him that it opens up shit for everyone else. So you kind of got to take both with him if you're gonna sign up for that. But you really can't forget that there's another side to that coin. It's not just 30-point games.
Yeah, it's just funny because if you would have told people before Kyrie signed his 3-year, $126 million deal with the Mavs, if you were like, hey, you're going to get Kyrie to behave himself for a whole season, I think 30 teams would have offered Kyrie a huge contract.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's never been a doubt about his talent, but the thing that's so infuriating about the earth is flat and I'm not going to get vaccinated and blah, 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 is that he is so talented and his shoes are the best sellers. So all these kids look up to him. And like Clint said, like you have a responsibility when these kids look up to you, and he has not lived up to that responsibility for a long time. So no, like 3 30-point games in the conference finals, I knew that was in there. I think we all knew that was possible from him. It's also possible he wins the championship and then gets on his podium and starts saying like, oh, hey, by the way, the earth is flat. You should like blah, blah, blah. The Illuminati's real. We're going to president's a lizard. All sorts of crazy stuff could come out of his mouth. So I think
that might actually be an improvement.
I think
the president is a lizard.
Yeah. He's been there for 2 seasons so far, right? Like the upcoming season is going to be his final year.
I think he was there and then he extended. So I think he has a couple of years left on his contract.
Okay, so this kind of leads into my point then that like his shelf life in locker rooms is not long. Like outside of Cleveland, like he's been a cancer in any locker room that he's been in, and it's just a matter of time before like he overstays his welcome and starts to erode like relationships and stuff within the team. And I'll joke around and say things in jest. Like obviously he's a great basketball player and he's a bit of a loon. But like the reason why I wouldn't want him on my squad is because of how awful he is in the locker room and all the problems that come with that. And at this point in time, like it's kind of his last hurrah, in my opinion. Like he doesn't have many more miles left on his legs as far as like good opportunities to get back to the position where he is in. I think a lot of people are doing the Kyrie apologist stuff, and I'm gonna plant my flag and say that like even if you win and you have the title for this year, does it set you up in a position that you're going to be fucked 2 years from now? And is it worth it to like implode over a player for one championship and then go back to like be rebuilding? And obviously like they have some good talent on their team. Like Luka's the cornerstone, but like these are all things that you would have to consider. And I don't know if I would be willing to gamble on that.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the lesson that many people are going to take away from this Kyrie thing, or at least the lesson I'm taking away, is that the NBA GMs are always going to take risk on the talented guys, right? Like Matt and I have been talking about how Paul George is a free agent this summer, and he's like 35, 36 years old. Someone's going to offer him a max contract, probably the Detroit Pistons.
Fuck off.
Which, no, I'm just going to say that my favorite podcast in the history of this. So this is like episode 186 of this podcast. The best podcast is going to be next year after the Pistons sign Paul George to a max contract and they're in the play-in game. And Matt comes on this podcast. He goes, dude, you know who's not that bad? This is the best moment in over 200 episodes at that point. It's going to be my favorite moment.
You've completely miscalculated here, because if we're heading into the playoffs, I'm going to be pulling my hair out over the stress of needing to watch playoff P.
Holy shit.
Well, you guys are going to win like a play-in game, and Paul George is going to have like 37 points, and Matt's going to come on the podcast and be like, oh, maybe I was a little hard on Paul George. And I
cannot see that happening. Even if Paul George could be the next like Messiah, and I don't think Matt would fall on that sword. Like he would bury himself for the sake of.
I will never forgive him for that fucking Gatorade commercial.
He's got convictions, which I appreciate, even if like they fly in the face of like what is actually like what he wants. Paul George could deliver the Pistons a championship, and Matt wouldn't recognize it, and I would laugh hysterically.
He would bump Paul George.
I would be like, this was a Jalen Duren-led team.
That's how this is going to go.
That's how you earn your rings.
So I think people will always take risk on the talented guys because the upside is so high, right? And we, on this podcast 2 years ago, when Dallas lost in the conference finals to the Golden State Warriors, we looked at Dallas's cap space and said, God, this team is absolutely screwed. We have no idea what they're going to do because they had these huge contracts, and is like, how do you even make a move to get over the hump? And they go out and they take a massive risk that was almost universally panned at the time. Like, I don't think there was anybody that was like, this is a great move for them to get Kyrie.
Yeah.
You know, and it pays off in spades because they're back in the conference, you know, they're back in the championship. So,
yeah, I mean, they went out and they got him at his lowest, really.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be the thing is like, I'm already looking for the Kings. I'm like, okay, who are the distressed assets around the league that we could potentially trade for this offseason and like take that swing? Because if you're like a borderline contender or you're like a fringe team that's trying to become a borderline contender, that's the type of move that people are going to look at. It's like the type of move that's always had the highest upside, right? But then you look at someone like James Harden and it's like, yeah, it also has a huge downside potentially as well. And it's to Clint's point too, like we'll see how this plays out. This is 1 year. I would argue that if you win the championship, it's worth it, even if you implode down the road. The only way it becomes not worth it is if Luka's like, I want out because this Kyrie thing went sideways. Now it's a real problem. But I think it's good to start the podcast talking about Kyrie because there's been a lot of Kyrie conversation. I think he's certainly the most interesting figure narratively in this finals, coming back to Boston after, you know, a really rocky exit. I can't wait to watch him and Luka in Boston because Kyrie is going to get booed to death every time he touches the ball this entire series. And Luka is that type of guy that really feeds off of people shit talking him. Luka in that Wolves series, I think, showed us that he has that like psychotic edge that all of the greats have, where it's beyond I want to win. It's like I want to win and I'm going to scream at fans and talk shit to them and
make up stories about people wronging me that never happened just to like go in there with a chip on my shoulder.
He has like a tattoo on his arm of all the people that were drafted in front of him in the NBA draft. It just says like DeAndre Ayton and Marvin Bagley. He's like, fuck, I got this chip on my shoulder. But no, like Boston is the best fan base to have a rivalry with because they're a bunch of drunk shitheads. So yeah. Like, that's going to be super fun. And I say that as a Boston fan. I'm a Boston fan for every sport except for basketball. And when I watch Boston sports, I become a drunk shithead and start yelling at people. So I can't wait. And I'm like the most tame Boston fan, right?
You really are.
I am like the 1% of like realistic, like, but I'm still yelling at Tom Brady. I'm like, God, Tom Brady, you suck. Play better. So I can't wait to watch those two. Let's jump into like the actual series for a little bit, because I told you guys in the pre-show conversation that I am super torn on my pick. I have no idea who I'm going to pick at the end of this podcast. You know, we're like 15 minutes in and I'm like, okay, we got another hour and I got to make up my mind here. Do you guys have a read on this series? Are you leaning one way or the other right now?
I settled on my prediction a couple days ago.
Clint, are you pretty locked in or are you kind of up in the air?
I'm up in the air, but I think I know the position of you guys, and I'm gonna kind of be a wild card because there's somebody that I have watched for a very long time in the series that I think deserves like a hell of a lot of credit, and that individual's name is Al Horford. I can remember watching him when I was like, high school and college playing ball, and he was around then. He's kind of like a journeyman, and I think that like as a veteran on the team, he is like part of the spark that's getting those guys like fired up. If you have a team full of guys who have made it to the game, and they have not only they're trying to win it, for themselves, but they're trying to win it for the old guys too. And I think that that's like that is a very powerful thing to, I think it makes you play more team basketball and it makes you play more as a unit than it does if, it's your first one, you're going out there, you're hungry, but like you don't have other things riding on it. It's not just you.
Can I tell you something disturbing?
Go for it.
I hate Al Horford.
I
I feel like I'm the only one who feels this way. I made a video for our social media breakouts about, I watched the game against, I think it was Cleveland, where he was like 2 of 11 from 3. And I was like, this is everything that's wrong with the Celtics and everything that's wrong with NBA basketball right now, is that Al Horford is out here shooting 11 threes and only making 2 of them. And I think it was like 2 or 3 games later, he went 5 of 9. And my dad's like, you still talking shit about Al Horford on that podcast? And I was like, no, I stand by my opinion, though, is that Al Horford shooting that many threes in a game is just never going to be a good thing.
Yeah,
that's fair.
So I'm super torn on this series, though. And the reason I'm torn is because typically I am a very statistically driven person when it comes to sports. And like Matt knows this, that sometimes I am statistically driven to a fault where I will pick things purely on a statistical basis and then the game plays out. And sometimes it goes my way, sometimes it doesn't. But this Celtics team finished the regular season tied for the 3rd best net rating of all time. Number 1 is the 96 Bulls. Number 2 is the 97 Bulls. And the Celtics are tied at 11.6 net rating with the 2017 Warriors, which was the first year of Curry and Durant. They're currently 8th all time in playoff net rating ever. That 16-17 Warriors team coincidentally was 4th. They're one of 15 teams ever to make the finals with 20 or less total losses, regular season and playoffs combined. Those 15 teams are 4-1. The only one that lost was the 73-9 Warriors team that blew the 3-1 lead to the Cavaliers. By net rating, this is the best Boston Celtics team ever. Ever. I want people to let that sink in, that better than the 08 championship team with Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen. Better than any team Larry Bird played on. Maybe better by net rating than any team Bill Russell played on. We don't know because they didn't have math back then.
It wasn't.
It was all just the eye test.
Yeah, it is 100% eye test. But this is the thing with the Boston team is like there's all these stats that say that this is one of the best Celtics teams ever. It's tied for the third best regular season team of all time. And yet I watch them and I don't see it.
Yep.
I don't see it when I watch this team.
Not at all.
It's hard to say because, like, in some capacity, these guys are really synergistic. But when it's important, you see the synergies kind of like dissolve a little bit, and they definitely don't become more than the sum of their parts. Like, there are games where it's really, really surprising and they do like an awesome job. And then there are games where it's like you almost let that one slip away. And you shouldn't have done that. Like, you were in a commanding position, and then it got real tight at the end. And it's like you got to have the drive to just like put your foot on the throat and, like, get enjoyment out of the fact that you're mollywopping someone.
And
to use like an Irish term.
My issue with the Celtics is that, having watched them during these playoffs, is that has become the norm for this Celtics team. Is like they, talent-wise, have massively outclassed their opponent in every series they've been in. And like their win-loss record certainly reflects that. But when you actually take a look at like the point differential in each of the individual games, it is mind-boggling their inability to pull away from teams. I mean, what are we like? Are they just counting on Luka getting hurt? Like, is that the strategy? Because I don't think that works when you're going against Luka. I just don't. Like, he is going to go into predator mode, and you have to outpace him. For them, what that really means is, well, we better hit our fucking threes.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing with this series. I guess two things. One, like you mentioned, I watched those last couple games against the Pacers. They won game 3 and game 4 in Indiana without Tyrese Halliburton playing by 3 points.
Yeah.
Each game by
Not
3 points.
Look.
Yeah, and I watched that. I'm watching Nembhard cook them. And I'm like, this team has an 11.6 net rating for the regular. Like, that would never happen to the 96 Bulls. It would never happen to the 97 Bulls.
No.
Those guys didn't play to the level of their competition.
This is the thing, is like these teams, and you talk about like the 16-17 Warriors, who I think is the best basketball team of all time. Just Kevin Durant's first year with the Warriors. They had Curry and Durant, best regular season net rating, really good playoff net rating. These really great teams go for the kill when they have the chance, and like they don't play up and down to the level of their competition.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a couple games in this series where Boston wins by double digits, like 10 to 20 points, because they're going to hit their threes. They're going to look really good doing it. Like,
the crowd's going to be 140 decibels.
Yeah, the crowd's going to be into it. But I also think that there's going to be games in this series where it's really tight and it's nut crunching time, like it was against Indiana. And like, yeah, Indiana just couldn't pull them out. But if Luka was on that Indiana team, watching the 4 games that I watched, that series is easily at least 3-1 Indiana. With Luka. I mean, you have that first game that goes to OT. You have the 2 games in Indiana that Indiana only wins by 3. Like, I don't think it's a stretch to say that they're at least up 3-1 if they have Luka Doncic on that team.
Yep.
There are moments where I hope that like somebody could stick it back to me with like things that I've said about Tatum and Brown. As much flack as I give them, I really want them to use this opportunity to claim like that spot where it's like, okay, I have my ring now. Like, I've proven that I can get it done. Everybody can shut the fuck up. Like, I would love for those guys to be able to say it to some nobody in Michigan. Like, but I want to see that because it creates more parity between the conferences. It gives the East like a legitimacy that I think we're like sorely lacking, or at least like the perception of that. And I think that like, yeah, it makes it gives the appearance that like things are a little more competitive than what they might actually be. But I do think that if they're gonna do it, they have the roster to do it. It's just like, okay, you can't fuck this up. Like you gotta go and you gotta play hard. I think like the other thing too is like you talked about the Warriors and the Bulls. You could tell that those guys were having fun while they were playing
Mm-hmm.
in the huge games that they were playing, like whether it's Rodman or fucking Draymond Green being dingbats, like causing all sorts of issues and hooting and hollering and stuff. Like it definitely was fun for them while they were playing those games. And I think that if you're taking that aspect out of the game, then I would have no doubt in my mind that the Mavs will run away with it. I just hope that the Celtics come looking to play their game, to like enjoy that moment and to try and capitalize on something that like there's only one team at the end of the season that gets to walk away with a win. I do believe that the Celtics have the opportunity to do it, and I'm hoping that like I can solidify that a little more as the series goes out. But I'm hoping for like the East and all these other things that the Celtics walk away with it. And I don't want to see Kyrie ever win a championship ever again.
I just think looking at the statistical profile of this series, if I take the names off the jerseys and all that stuff, I'm 100% like the Celtics should absolutely win this series.
Mm-hmm.
But the eye test is an issue for me. The other issue for me that came up when I was doing my research, the Mavericks have Luka Doncic. Luka is, by any definition and by anybody you ask, a top 5 player in the NBA. And I wanted to play like a quick game with you guys just to kind of illustrate my point here. I'm going to give you a stat category, and I want you to tell me who the leader for the NBA playoffs this year is in each stat category. So who is the playoff leader in points right now?
I'm gonna say Luka.
Yes. Who is the playoff leader in rebounds right now?
Steven Adams.
Luka.
That would be a good guess if Steven Adams had played in the playoffs.
I know. He would have.
This is the amazingness of Steven Adams, is that even though he has played 0 playoff games, he is leading the playoffs in rebounds.
And that's why he's a top 30 player.
Who is the playoff leader in assist right now?
I would imagine it's Luka.
It is. Who is the playoff leader in steals right now?
Luka.
Yes, I think we all know where we're going with this. The playoff leader in points, rebounds, assists, steals, field goals made, 3-pointers made, free throws made. Luka Doncic. So we talked about how he kind of has the opportunity here to grab the reins as being the best player in the world. I don't know, no matter what happens. A
stretch.
Yeah, my case for it was like, if he beats the Wolves, this was before the Wolves series. I was like, if he beats the Wolves, people are going to start saying like, oh, he beat the team that Jokic couldn't beat. And then if he goes on to win the finals, gets finals MVP, and then goes back to Slovenia, leads Slovenia to the Olympics, pulls some of the like Olympic upsets, I think that I was like, if all that happens, we're going to start having a debate. And then they go up 3-0 on the Wolves, and people are like, Luka Doncic is the best player in the world. He's better than Jokic. Don't at me. No, I'm on the same page. I'm still going to have Jokic there, but Luka's a top 5 guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and to the credit of like where you're going with that, he at least has the opportunity to create the argument. And that it's a very small list of guys every year that even have a chance at that.
Yep. On the other side, are we all in agreement that Jayson Tatum is the best player on the Celtics?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a case for Jaylen Brown still, but
if only he could dribble.
Is Jayson Tatum a top 5 guy?
No.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't want to get into like the whole list of guys you would take ahead of Jayson Tatum because we're gonna do the NBA top 30 this year. We're gonna invite Clint back for that, so we'll like really dive into who's where.
Yes.
But I just wrote down like who my top 5 guys are off the top of my head, and I had Jokic, Luka, Giannis, Shea, and Steph Curry.
Fair.
So
I guess like he's not a top 5 guy to me, and it has nothing to do with like people ahead of him. He doesn't have like I don't think people are saying Jayson Tatum is gonna like fucking like his whole goal is to crush me and to just emasculate me as a basketball player. Like he doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. And at the end of the day, like all of the greats and all the people who are considered for those conversations all are just like, no, I don't care if I'm playing you for $1 or the world championship. Like, I'm gonna make you eat shit. And like he just doesn't have that attitude. And um I think that like that right there contributes to like you got to play at their level or you're playing down to the competition rather than making them play to your stuff. And it's like I feel like he has like inconsistent nights where it's like, yeah, you always want to have a guy that can like back you up a little bit, but like you don't want to defer to Brown. You don't want to defer to Porzingis. Like you don't want to defer to these people. Like you want to be the man. Like you want to be the guy. And in order to do that, like you have to have the I'm gonna go kill him attitude, and he just doesn't have it. At least in my opinion. Maybe we see something different in this series.
Well,
no,
we've talked about this before, right? And it's like the threes, the 3-pointers is another like huge symptom of this, right? Because he has the skill set to absolutely murder going to the rim and in the mid-range, like probably put together a really good post game too if he wanted to with his frame. Like he has so many other ways that he could dominate scoring with the basketball. And yet, every year when we get to the playoffs, like he settles for so many 3-pointers, and they're not just like good in rhythm open looks.
this is my favorite thing to say about Jayson Tatum is that he's out there doing a Kobe Bryant cosplay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, do not be Kobe. Be Jayson Tatum. Jayson Tatum is a great basketball player. You don't need to play like Kobe, even though he's your idol. But
the difference there is, and I'm sorry to all the Boston fans who are going to hear this. I'm thinking of one in particular, Mr. Fall. I'm sorry. But like Tatum's soft. Like that's the issue. Like he is just a soft player. Like if he was hard, he would be taken to the rack, like talking shit like Jimmy Butler, like acting like a gosh darn freight train. But like the fact of the matter is, why do you settle for outside shots like that? Because you don't want to get beat up inside. Like,
no, this is the thing that pisses me off about Jayson Tatum is like you have the talent to be unanimous, like top 5 guy.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't be able to make a list right now of 5 guys I would take over Jayson Tatum. But I did easily, and I think you can debate even more guys. Like I'm not saying Jayson Tatum 6. I'm saying like kind of like Devin Booker more than I like Jayson Tatum. Kind of like
even mention
Jimmy Butler. Like there's going to be other guys, but so we all agree Jayson Tatum's not a top 5 guy. I went back through the entire history of the NBA to look at how many teams won the championship without a top 5 guy. Because that's something we've always said on the podcast is like, hey, you want to win an NBA championship, you need a top 5, 6, 7 guy, whatever the number is. I think some of these are going to be potentially controversial and we can talk about them, but going back in time, going backwards, the 2014 San Antonio Spurs go 62-20. They're the 1 seed. They win the championship. They had Kawhi, but Kawhi wasn't really like Kawhi yet. They had Tim Duncan was kind of the wily vet at that point, but he wasn't Tim Duncan anymore. The
He was
league,
old, yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
The league has Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Chris Paul, amongst other guys. So that the Spurs championship that year, they beat the Heat that had LeBron James and Dwayne Wade after Dwayne Wade had kind of fallen off. I always say that championship was what I call an infrastructure championship, where you have these guys who know how to get it done, and like Parker Ginobili, Tim Duncan. You have the young stud who's coming along in Kawhi Leonard, who ended up being Finals MVP. And you have Greg Popovich, who's one of, if not the best coaches to ever do it. And you get it done that way.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of reminds me of when the Patriots beat the Rams in the Super Bowl, the second one back in like 2018, where it's like, okay, this was really like, we have Brady, we have Belichick, and it's going to get us one more before we ride off into the sunset. Coincidentally, I was looking up who the top players in the NBA were in 2014. Taj Gibson was third in PER that year and third in win shares per 48. He was also fourth in box plus minus, which was tied with Kevin Durant. He was sixth man of the year. And this is kind of the illustration of why advanced stats are not a perfect science, but Taj Gibson, really good season. The one I think is going to be super controversial, the 2011 Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki beat LeBron James and Dwayne Wade in LeBron and Wade's first season in Miami. Looking back at the stats from the regular season, I think history is rewritten a little bit to tell us that Dirk was a top 5 guy that season because of how awesome his playoff run was.
Dirk's always been good, and Dirk and Tim Duncan, in my opinion, have like a very similar issue where they do everything right and they're quiet about it. So like, yeah, you're just like, oh, Dirk had another good game. All right, like moving on to the next thing, like that's expected. But then like you really take a look at it and you're like, holy cats, like this guy, like even to his old like even to his standard, like he played better and had like a phenomenal run. But it's like, yeah, he's a quiet player. Like, what does he do that's sexy?
Yeah,
Like his jumper doesn't look good. And although it goes in, like I'm not going to argue that. Like but like he's not a sexy player to watch. He's not throwing down huge dunks and like nuts to the face people. Like he quietly gets it done. He does the things that he needs to. And at the end of the day, like that's the most important part of it.
Yeah, I think for a long time, Dirk was a top 5 guy in the league, and he was an elite player who was seen as a choker, right?
Yeah.
Like he won MVP. He was on a Mavericks team that was the number 1 overall seed and lost to the Golden State Warriors. Like he was a choker, but I think by this point, by 2011, he had declined just slightly to the point where he wasn't a top 5 guy. And then all of a sudden in the playoffs, he's the best player in the entire world. And I think that was the thing that was so magical about the playoff run. And history has been rewritten to tell us like, oh, this should have happened because Dirk was so good. But I think saying that kind of takes away what was so awesome about those playoffs is that like he was awesome. He was a choker. He started getting near like kind of declining a little bit and then gives like one more just phenomenal performance. Right. So
yeah,
I counted him. The league had LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Kobe Bryant. Derrick Rose was MVP that year. You got Dwight Howard, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul. 22-year-old Kevin Durant led the league in scoring that year on a per game basis. Like there was a lot of talent in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm arguing Dirk wasn't a top 5 guy that year. But
I would accept that.
Yeah, he at least like pre-playoffs. That's what I'm trying to say is like going into the playoffs, he was not. He goes and averages 27.7 points per game in the playoffs and takes out LeBron, Dwayne Wade, Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and then sweeps Kobe. And it's like just mic drop. But
how dare you take credit away from JJ Barea taking out LeBron James?
Sorry, so he took out all those other guys and JJ Barea took out LeBron James. Pre 2011, I had to go all the way back to a team that's near and dear to Matt's heart, the 2004 Pistons.
The greatest team ever.
They're near and dear to my heart too. Like,
I love them too. I had a Chauncey Billups jersey growing up here in Metro Detroit. I loved me some Chauncey Billups. The talent level in the early 2000s in the NBA is kind of insane at this point. You have Tim Duncan, Shaquille O'Neal, Kevin Garnett, Kobe Bryant, Tracy McGrady, all at the height of their powers. Coincidentally, my boy Peja Stojakovic, 11th in PER that year, third in points per game.
God, he was so good.
Fucking killing it. Well documented that this is one of the best defensive teams of all time. Like, probably number one. I think you at least can't argue that it's not like a top 3 defensive unit ever. I texted you guys this earlier. I think people might argue like Chauncey Billups or Rasheed Wallace is like closer to the top than not.
No, I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
The guy I would make the argument for as a top 10, top 5 player is Ben Wallace.
Yeah.
87 defensive rating per 100 possessions in the regular season that year goes down to 83 in the playoffs, where his primary assignments are fucking prime Shaquille O'Neal in the finals. And then before that, Jermaine O'Neal, Kenyon Martin, and then they played Milwaukee in the first round, which didn't have a great big man at that point. But
Jermaine O'Neal was good at that point in time. Like,
so was
really
Kenyon
good.
Martin. So was Kenyon Martin. But for reference, Tim Duncan's defensive rating that season was 89. So I just keep seeing stuff where,
and I think Tim Duncan's like a couple inches taller than him too, right?
Oh yeah,
because Ben Wallace is 6'8", I think.
Yeah, he was listed at 6'9". Tim Duncan is like 7 feet.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's always been the amazing thing about Ben Wallace is he was a 6'9" center and went up against guys like Shaq and Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett and was the best defensive player in the league.
Yeah, I've always wondered like how much of that 6'9" were they saying was hair? Because we all know how height listings in athletics go.
What was more intimidating, Ben Wallace with an afro or Ben Wallace with cornrows?
Yeah, I feel like it's the cornrows.
Yeah,
I agree.
I mean, the afro looks like goofy, and I'm not like, I appreciated it, but like at the end of the day, like I think he looks like a meaner, badder bitch with the cornrows. Like,
his profile picture on Basketball Reference has the cornrows, and he's not smiling. He's like looking down, and he's like angry, and I'm like, that's a fucking intimidating guy to go up against. We mentioned Tim Duncan lately, and I just wanted to throw this in there because anytime Tim Duncan comes up, I feel like I need to say this. I keep seeing stuff right now about like, oh, Luka has the chance to take the best player in the world championship belt from Jokic. And I've seen a lot of stuff on like social media and podcasts of people talking about like, well, who's the best player in the world? Going back to like the ABA NBA merger, it's Kareem for this many years, and then Magic, and then it's Bird, and then it's Jordan. People don't give Tim Duncan the respect he deserves. I think there's a very solid period of time from 2003 to 2008 where Tim Duncan is the best player in the world. And people argue and they're like Shaq and Kobe and blah, blah, blah. Tim Duncan is higher on the all-time list to me than either of those guys. And I think he was the best player in the world for like a 5 to 6 year stretch there and does not get credit for that. And you can
well, wasn't the ball handler, right? Like that. And I think that's one of the things that's really important to recognize is that like consistency is key. He showed up, he shut the fuck up, he did his job, and like that's why Pop loved him, right? And like you were going to count on him because like not only was he on when he needed to be on, but like the effort plays and stuff, he made every single one of them. You never had to worry about what effort he was going to give. And when you're not like dribbling the ball up the court or again doing like the high flying really fun stuff that people like to watch, instead you're somebody who Clint's sitting back here like that guy's footwork is fucking incredible. Like nobody wants to be paying attention to that, but it's so important. And he was a linchpin for that team. And yeah, like I would totally agree with you 100%. Like Tim Duncan absolutely deserves more credit, but he would be the person who would also say, well, Manu and Parker and my teammates were also there and they also did an enormous amount to facilitate me be
Yeah.
able to do that.
Yeah.
That only
Well,
makes me give him more credit.
Yeah.
that's the part that makes that discussion about that era difficult too, because the debate with him has always kind of gone back and forth, but like with him and Kevin Garnett, right? And like prime Kevin Garnett had not shit for help. So it's that is a tangled web to sift through.
Yeah. No, I'm just
But
saying, like
he's got an argument.
Yeah.
we're sitting over here slobbering over Ben Wallace, like, and rightfully deserved
Mm-hmm.
in his 87 defensive rating in the 03-04 season. Tim Duncan's defensive rating that year was 89. Like, not that's an
Yeah.
absolutely ridiculous number. I have Tim Duncan fourth in my all-time list. You're talking about who the greatest basketball players of all time are. The only guys ahead of him are Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Bill Russell. That's my
I
take.
might switch one of those guys out, but yeah.
Yeah. But back to my point about teams who won championships without top five guys. So we have the 04 Pistons. Before 2004, it's a lot of Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I had to go all the way from 2004 to 1979 to find another team that won a championship without a top five guy. And that is the 1979 Seattle Supersonics. The Supersonics had 7 guys who scored in double figures that year, led by Gus Williams, Dennis Johnson, and a very young Jack Sikma, who was 23. Speaking of insane defensive ratings, Jack Sigma's D rating as a 23-year-old was 97 per 100 possessions that year.
What was his part-time job that he worked when he wasn't playing ball?
Plumber. 100%. So that team had a lot of good players, but not anybody amazing. The league at that point has Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, George Gervin, Moses Malone, Dr. J, Robert Parrish, Artis Gilmore, who I just learned the other day is the all-time leader in defensive rebounds. In case anybody wanted to know that,
That's interesting.
Yeah, go to halloftrivia.com and play the games. Artis Gilmore is the cheat code for Chicago. So, yeah, that was pretty much it. Is like those 4 teams. You go, too far before that, the records aren't great, but it's a lot of like there's Bill Russell and there's a lot more like Celtics teams winning championships.
Yeah.
Last point before we go back to modern day and talk about the actual NBA finals that are happening right now. Marcus Johnson played for Milwaukee in 1979, was second in VORP and win shares that year. Great player. So I named a lot of other good players that year, but somebody out there is some Milwaukee fan is like, you forgot about Marquez Johnson. And I want you to know I didn't forget. So very limited amount of teams who won the NBA championship without a top 5 guy. And although I look at the stats and the stats tell me the Boston Celtics should win this, I just worry about the games where we have nut crunching time and Luka comes in and it's just like, who's going to match me? Like, who's going to challenge me in the last 5 minutes of this game and keep up with me? And I just don't know that Boston has that guy.
I feel like Tatum and Brown need to spend their off season with those monks that like specifically like hit themselves in the crotch to like train their resolve.
I just think that they need to, I don't know how else to describe it other than like somebody getting hit in the mouth and being like, yeah, that wasn't pleasant. And then like, I don't want to do that again. Whereas like somebody else being hit in the mouth is like, no, to hell with you. Like, I'm going to give it back twice as hard and I'm going to make you regret doing that. Like, something that I really wanted to point out to, You said that Jayson has the talent in all of these things, but he also has the body. Like this guy is a genetic anomaly, and the fact that he's 6'8", lean, 210 pounds, strong dude, athletic, can move laterally really well, and that you can have the talent, but to also be blessed with the body and like those things to be able to do that is just like I feel like it's a sin that we don't see him banging inside more.
Mhm. Well, this is kind of the thing too for Boston defensively is like Boston has the guys physically to throw at Luka and Kyrie. Like you're going to see a lot of Jaylen Brown, I think, as the primary defender on Luka. And I think that they're going to put Jayson Tatum on like Lively or Gafford so that when they do the pick and roll and they switch, then it switches from Jaylen Brown to Jayson Tatum guarding him. I think you'll see some Drew Holiday on Luka. I think you'll also see a lot of Drew Holiday and Derek White kind of situations on Kyrie Irving. And you'll see, those guys who are going to go into that switch action guarded by Jayson Tatum. And all of a sudden, Jayson Tatum's on Kyrie Irving. So, like, you have the longer, big body guys to throw at them. You have the smaller, twitchier defenders to throw at them. It sounds like Kristaps Porzingis is going to be healthy for game one. So there's your rim protector. It's just a matter of, like, strategically, when I look at this series and look at Jason Kidd versus Joe Mazzulla, the Dallas Mavericks have spent the entire playoffs finding who the weak link is on your defense and pulling that guy out and being like, Luka is going to fucking cook you right now. Yeah. We saw him do it to Rudy Gobert. We saw him do it to Chet and these other guys. We saw him do it to Zubac and the guys in the Clipper series. Can Porzingis move laterally? It's a hard word to say on a podcast. With that calf injury he's coming back from, how long is Al Horford going to get out there? Because, we talked about Big Al, but having what is he, 37, 38 now?
He's got to reserve his energy for at least 12 3-pointers.
They're going to do they're going to do their best to pull these guys out onto Luka and Kyrie and let those guys cook. And I don't know with Joe Mazzulla if he's going to be able to make the strategic adjustments necessary to prevent that from happening. That scares me. Not that Jason Kidd is like this great tactician who has a massive advantage, but like Jason Kidd is good and has done a very good job of making adjustments in these playoffs. Like the Dallas Mavericks have not lost back-to-back playoff games this entire postseason. And a large part of that is that they've been able to go and make the adjustments they need to make to win these games.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Mazzulla, I'm like, you got to show it to me, buddy.
Well, and part of it too is when you have Luka, you don't need to be a mastermind. There are points in the game where you can just say, "Hey, Luka, go hunt."
I mean, the Celtics should be able to say that with Tatum though too.
Yeah, but the thing is that dog hasn't figured out how to hunt.
He hadn't found the dog in him.
No.
The other thing that concerns me is like if we flip to the other side of the ball, and like I can talk about how Boston's going to attack Dallas here in a minute too to make the Celtics fans feel better. But like you go to the other side of the ball, the Mavs switch on defense. They switch almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
When you switch, you are encouraging isolation basketball because Derek Lively is going to switch on to Jayson Tatum and Daniel Gafford's going to switch on to Jaylen Brown. Right? Like they're going to have these switches. Boston needs to be disciplined enough to punish these switches and not go into isolation basketball.
Yeah.
Because theoretically, if Kristaps Porzingis is out there and he's healthy, if Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively are switching on to these wings, that means that someone small is switching on to Kristaps Porzingis.
He's got a good field goal percentage too against Dallas. Well, almost 60%. I do think that I would imagine this is a question down the road, but I'm just going to say my piece now. Like Kristaps Porzingis, I believe is the X factor for them. Like if he has a great series, I believe that they'll win. Like And it's not just because he's a big, tall white guy with a goofy ass smile and beard. Like, I think that like he commands enough like respect with the outside shot that he's got. Like his 3-point percentage against Dallas during a regular season was 50%. Like that's good. So I think that like there's going to be a lot of like that game where it's like, yeah, I believe that if he plays well, they're they're in a really good spot to win. And it's because I would ask you on Dallas, like who's going to switch and be able to defend like him where he can't get a good pass or a good read off to someone or a good shot? Like who's gonna be able to take that assignment?
Well, no, this is exactly it. This is exactly where I was going. So it's a
Yep.
very good
Oh, okay.
point is that all year this year, Boston punished the switches by when someone smaller would switch on to Kristaps would get into like either the elbow or deeper and bang down low. And he has that little like tiny hook push shot. Like, so this is the whole thing. Like Derek Lively, or not Derek Lively, what is his name? Derek Jones Jr.
Yeah, Derek Jones Jr.
If he starts as like the primary defender on Tatum and Gafford is on Kristaps and they do a pick and roll and they switch it, and all of a sudden Gafford is on Tatum, is Tatum going to be disciplined enough to punish that switch? Or is he going to play isolation basketball and be like, okay, I can take this guy and cook him? And if they punish the switches and they play good disciplined basketball this entire series, I absolutely think the Boston Celtics can win. If they're going to play isolation basketball and do I'm going to take 4 dribbles and take a 3, I absolutely think the Boston Celtics will lose.
Yep.
And it's a matter of like, I absolutely think you're 100% correct, Clint, that Kristaps is the X factor here. If he's healthy and plays well, the Boston Celtics should win. But,
Yeah.
and the big but, Boston does this where they play this game where they're like, okay, it's my turn, it's your turn. We're going to ISO these guys. We're going to take them off the dribble. Boston, Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown want to be the Dallas Mavericks. They want to be Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, who can just absolutely cook guys off of switches. You want Luka to play isolation basketball because he's so fucking good at it. I don't want Tatum to play isolation basketball. I want to see that switch get punished. And I just don't know if Boston can stay that disciplined for 7 games and actually do it.
That's a Kyle Lowry size butt.
Yeah. It's a giant butt. It's the second biggest butt in the NBA behind Kyle Lowry. And it all goes back to my point that like looking at it from an X's and O's standpoint, looking at it from a statistical standpoint, I want to pick Boston to win this. But when I watch the games and in my heart of hearts, when I know that Luka is the second best player in the world, I don't know that I can pick the Celtics.
The point that I would make too is like if you slow the game down and play isolation basketball and don't punish the screens, you're not busting your ass, you're not doing that to like gas them out. You're playing exactly into the plan that Kyrie and Luka want to be in because they want to be able to run a half court offense, pick the weakest guy out, run isolation and ram it down your throat or shoot over top of you. Like, and I think like if you get into a back and forth like that, you don't ever want to play to your opponent's strengths. Like, and I think that if you start doing the isolation game, like you were mentioning, Adam, like it's a really, really bad formula to set yourself up with. So it's like, no, just play your game. You have to trust and like play your game. Don't get sucked into this dumb bullshit. Like utilize what is in front of you, utilize your teammates, and don't play into the game that like Dallas wants you to play. Because they would love to have Tatum doing isolation basketball because like what? Oh, you're not gonna go inside, you're gonna shoot a 3. All right, I'll take that. Like I would rather have somebody shooting 3s live and die by a 3 than banging inside, getting and one opportunities and foul trouble and all the rest.
Yeah, Clint, you play World of Warcraft, right? or
I
have played?
have a little bit, yeah.
Oh, so you might appreciate this. Like Luka Doncic, though, the thing about him is that he's the super like aggro tank guy, where I think he might pull that out of Tatum and be like, Luka's going to be talking a ton of shit to the fans, the players, the refs, the coaches, like, and he does that to guys where he's like, you know, oh, you can't beat me. I'm better than you. And like, even if Dallas loses the game, he's going to make Tatum feel like you're not on my level.
Yeah.
Right. And he's going to be talking his shit the whole game. And then like, I could just see the game where Tatum's like, fuck this. I'm just as good as that guy is. And I'm going to prove it right here.
Well,
And that's the downfall of the Celtics.
And here's the thing though, too. Like with all the shit that Luka's gonna talk, if Tatum does not find that dog in him in this series, I don't think he'll ever find it.
I mean, it's do or die at this point. Like you gotta show some heart because you don't want to go down 0-2 in your finals career.
Mm-hmm.
That's like LeBron level of stuff, and I don't know if I'd want to have that trajectory of losing more finals than I've won.
Yeah, I would not want to be in that Celtics front office or locker room if they do not win this finals. Like I think it's there for them to win, but this has been like an 8-year journey with this Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown core of conference finals appearances and an NBA finals appearance. Like they're now in their second one in 3 years. They lose the first one. They have the embarrassing loss to Miami last year. Like they've had all sorts of just so close, keep banging your heads against the glass ceiling. And like narratively, it makes sense that it's like it's finally time to break through and be the champions. And to do
and then
it,
you got this foreigner son of a bitch trying to fuck it up for the Americans.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like to do it, you got to beat Luka Doncic. So
as they also have a European basketball star in their lineup who's like really good,
who used to play for Dallas, right? So that's kind of that's another underrated storyline here is like Kristaps going back to Dallas. But I do think it's funny. A lot of people are like, Boston has the experience edge. They've been to the finals. They've been to all these conference finals. Like Dallas has been to one conference finals. Luka Doncic, when he was 18 years old, was playing in stadiums where armed guards were carrying AK-47s and fans were setting off flares in the stands and throwing them onto the court. You cannot rattle this man. The crowd in Boston yelling racial slurs at him will not rattle this man. And I just feel like Luke is that guy now who just absorbs all this hate. And the more hate that he absorbs, the better he plays.
Oh, man. I don't know about all that.
Oh, dude, I think watching that Minnesota series, him, like, he's getting buckets and he's yelling at fans and he's going, who's the bitch now? To fans.
Yeah,
it's
oh, that's totally fair. And I'm all about it. Like, I love that spirit and I love the fire, but it's like, he also has a problem of running his mouth and getting into like technical trouble, which I was going to ask you, like, what's the over under on his technicals throughout the finals? I'm going to say like maybe 2. I feel like two's like a decent conservative guess for him because like you're going to be way amped up, your first opportunity to win an NBA title, like, tempers are going to be high. He's kind of baby mode when it comes to the refs. Like, let's be honest.
Oh yeah. Well, this is the thing I was going to say though, is like, is this going to be like too much hate for Luka Doncic where he wants to prove a point so badly,
turned into a rabid dog?
Well, is it possible that Luka could stop playing his game and being this like really smart basketball player and just being like, fuck these Boston fans, I'm cooking, and like if Luka does that, it's totally possible Luka just goes for 52 and it's like, okay, like doesn't matter anyway, but
and honestly, I don't know how much Luka actually cares about what these Boston fans are gonna do, right? Like he'll talk shit back, but like I honestly don't think he gives a fuck about any of them.
Oh,
No,
I'm
I
so
do
excited for it. I'm so
I
excited for
do
tomorrow.
I do think though that like okay, you can go out and score 52, but are your teammates involved? Because if they're not, like you're probably going to take an L. And what good does the fucking 52 points do you? Like it doesn't. It does nothing. Like it doesn't matter if you cook and you fry whoever's playing defense on you if you don't win the game because you didn't distribute and didn't do the things that you needed to do, then it's a moot point. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, Allen Iverson drug those guys to the finals, like, was it 2001 or something like that?
It was around
Yeah,
there, yeah.
Yep.
it's totally awesome. Guess what? He never had a championship. Real great game one though, stepping over Ty Lue. Like,
They should have
you,
given him a championship for just getting there with Eric Snow and Dikembe Mutombo as the other offensive options,
oh
right?
yeah,
Like, and then he has to go up against Kobe and Shaq, and it's like, oh god damn it. So, all right, we're nearing the end of our time. I think we've talked it to death. I think it's time to make picks. Who wants to go first?
Boston in six.
Spicy. Matt, what do you got?
Okay. I got Dallas in 6.
I am super duper on the fence. So I'm gonna go 7 either way, and I'm gonna say Dallas in 7. You know what it reminds me of is the Super Bowl.
I was just gonna call you out on that.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Super
Yep.
Bowl because the San Francisco 49ers had every statistical reason to win. All the profiles said they were the better team, and Matt was like, "Yeah, but the other team has Patrick Mahomes."
No, that's not what Matt said. Matt said the other team has Taylor Swift.
That
Like, get the
yeah,
hell out.
I mean that's even a bigger draw than Patrick Mahomes. No, but this is the whole argument we had on the podcast is Matt's like, Adam, the other team has Patrick Mahomes. And I was like, I know, but look at all this stuff. And I got all these stats and all these numbers that mean so much to me. And he's like, yeah, but the other team has Patrick Mahomes.
I
And
mean, that's true, but like he's not infallible. Like nobody is. Everybody can have a bad game. Like something could happen. He could tweak something. Like
who, Luka
there's
or
a
Patrick Mahomes?
either, but in this situation, I'm talking about Luka. Like,
Okay. So I might agree on Luka. I don't agree on Patrick Mahomes. The man is infallible. You can't pick against Patrick Mahomes. But no, but we always say on this podcast is like one of our favorite sayings is sometimes you just have so and so. And sometimes it really does just come down to like you have the best player in the series, and it's really hard to pick against that. And so this case,
yeah.
I'm just gonna say sometimes you just have Luka.
Yeah. Well,
and you have someone who's been to the big dance, who's won the big dance, who took the shot where it was on his shoulders. And I definitely, sorry for interrupting, Matt, but I definitely don't think that that's something that is to be ignored. Like, I'll shit talk Kyrie Irving all day and call him a bozo, but like the guy's got basketball chops and he's dangerous. Like, use it, and that is what it is. Like, Luka could like very well be the best player, but like I don't think that they would have nearly as good a chance if you don't have Kyrie Irving, like steering the ship from a point guard position.
Yeah, and if you tell me that the path for the Celtics winning the championship is literally changing the entire way that they've been playing basketball the entire playoffs, and not just these playoffs, but like the last several postseasons, I'm not banking on that.
Yeah.
Like we've all heard and probably said the phrase when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And I have been given no reason to believe that Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum are gonna stop shooting way too many ISO threes when there's better passes available or a better opportunity to attack the rim. Like, again, like it truly blows my mind that Tatum has no interest in like expanding a post-up game because like he's got all the tools for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to throw out there before we sign off too that every year for the last 3 years we've been doing the podcast, someone on the podcast has correctly guessed the NBA Finals winner and amount of games. I think a couple of years ago, Matt had Golden State in 6. Last year I had Denver in 5. So one of the three of us has to get this right. So if the Celtics win, it needs to be in 6. If the Mavericks win, it needs to be in 6 or 7. I think there's a bet out there right now for the series to go over 5.5 games. I would hammer that. And I'm picking 7 because I'm just super unsure about my pick. And I feel like that's what you do when you're unsure is you just say like, it's going to be 7. And that way I have an out.
Well, and I do think too, like what makes the most money for the NBA. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if games are close and they could eke out like a couple of more like things for ads and all that kind of stuff, like I definitely think that like you're gonna see calls that you normally wouldn't see, and there's gonna be a bunch of bullshit excuses on replays and all these other things. But like
Yeah.
I think the NBA wants it to go 7 because it gives them an opportunity to prop up the MVP as like the next like LeBron or whatever, I guess. I mean, like there's tons of guys who could fill those shoes right now, just as far as like the cachet. But I think like Luka is I believe in my heart of hearts that like they would love for him to be that.
Yeah. I would love for the series to go 7 as well, because I just had a whole week where I didn't get to watch a basketball game. And it's a preview of the future, and I don't like it. So but that is it for us. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up on Gmail, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. And you can find our videos on TikTok, Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It's a long name, but you can't miss it. Clint, thank you for being here to open up our NBA Finals coverage.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm springing this on Clint live on the podcast, but we're going to try to have Clint here for the next however many weeks until we're done talking basketball.
Absolutely.
Yep. So through the NBA Finals, and then we're going to go into off season and NBA Top 30. We'll try to get Devin back for the Top 30 as well. Matt, you got any final thoughts before we sign off?
I think we kind of talked ad nauseum about it. So
let's watch some fucking basketball.
I know. I've kind of been Jones. There's been like so many
Matt got to watch
lately.
basketball on Monday. Matt got to watch some basketball on Monday. He's lying to you if he says he didn't.
That is true. I got to watch a little bit of basketball.
Did you guys was Clint hooping it up?
Yeah, we had like a work function, and I was playing against like a couple of our coworkers, and it was a lot of fun.
Nice. I have a WNBA fantasy team this year because my nephew called me and was like, "Hey, I started a WNBA fantasy league. Do you want to join?" And I thought it was a joke. And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And now I have a team. So I've been kind of keeping up on that a little bit, but I need some really good high level basketball, and that's all I'm going to say about it. So,
yeah.
I will say the discourse around the WNBA has been interesting this season.
I wish the big 3 were televised.
Oh, this is how you know that WNBA basketball is truly arriving on a large scale, is that the conversations about it are so shitty on all these shows. Is I'm like, oh, we're reaching peak NBA shitty levels, but you don't get the drama in the NBA that you get in the WNBA, because it's like, oh, this girl knocked this other girl down, but also turns out the girl she knocked down is her ex-fiance, and she's engaged to a girl who's on her team now.
Oh, fuck me.
I'm like, oh, fuck.
Jesus Christ. It's an episode of Days of Our Lives with shooty hoops.
Yeah.
You're getting 2 in 1.
All I'm saying
a bundle.
Is it's coming. It's coming for all of us. So, all right, you guys, thank you for being here. We'll be back next week. We might change the recording schedule up a little bit because there's a game on Wednesday next week. So we'll have to figure out what night we're going to record, because it's hard to record on a game night. So,
yeah.
We'll be back next week for a catch up on the NBA finals. And then a couple weeks after that, probably to go over the end of the finals. I think we got about 2 weeks of finals basketball games and then into NBA offseason and top 30 before Matt and I get back into football. I think in August is when we're scheduled for that. I think it's like early August is when we start talking football again. So dopeness. Also, there's going to be a week coming up here where there may or may not be a podcast. My daughter is due June 28th. So yeah, there's going to be a timing thing there. So if we miss a week, I apologize. We will be back. So, all right. Everybody enjoy the basketball. We will see you guys next week.
Yep. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Bye,
Robin.